And French arms company Tallis' bid for a permanent stay of prosecution will resume in the Pietermaritzburg High Court on Thursday. The arms manufacturer is accused, alongside former President Jacob Zuma, of fraud and corruption relating to the multi-billion rand arms deal. Tallis today argued that considering the lengthy delays through no fault of theirs, the company believed a fair trial wasn't possible. Tallis said its hands and those of its employees were clean, reiterating that it had no knowledge of transgressions relating to the awarding of the combat systems contract for South Africa's corvettes in 1999. The company has maintained that it respects the law and has a zero-tolerance policy on corruption. Well, let's chat more now about today's proceedings in the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Political analyst Ongama Mtimka joins us from Port Elizabeth. Ongama, thanks for your time this evening. I think a lot of focus being put from the point of Tallis there on the fact that they were not given the opportunity to make representations.
Good evening, Criselda. So this case doesn't stop to have areas in which, those that are accused are attempting to contest it such that it doesn't get to a level where they need to answer on the merits of the case. So it's one of the cases that have shown the classical link between politics and law, and questions have been posed around, for example, the political risks of the case as well as the legal issues. So today, it's important for me that while there can be a general suspicion that there are delay tactics on the part of both the former president and Thales, that wherever questions are raised about matters of procedure are answered to their satisfaction, so that the case can move on to focus a lot more on the merits of the case at hand.
So, Ongama, it's by no surprise then that it also brings up the issue of delays, saying that they believe there would be prejudice in this particular matter if it does go ahead, and that according to them, of course, what they're advancing on is the fact that for 9 years there had been no charges there.
Well, we can understand why there weren't charges. Even though the NPA can perhaps individualize it and say different leaders at different times within the organization took decisions, and when decisions were taken to forge ahead with the case, President Zuma challenged it every step of the way in every court and in finding every trick in the book to try and delay those. So they cannot say when the co-accused had been actively involved in actually delaying the case to create the impression that in its own volition the NPA had decided to stall the case purposely. But we also know that part of the political risks and the exposure of this case to the political interference is to be explained for part of the delay. So I hope at some stage the NPA will clarify the issues so that the case moves on to talk about the merits.
So I guess then part of that would be what we're seeing also on the part of Tallis is that they had distinctly pointed out and said that the National Prosecuting Authority, of course, under the previous leadership, had been hell-bent, as they put it, on prosecuting Tallis. Is that part of, one could presume, in this instance, in this bid for a permanent stay of prosecution, in trying to discredit the National Prosecuting Authority under its previous leadership, to make it seem as if there has been all along a particular conspiracy against the former president and anyone, I guess, who had been associated with him? So
what one reads is that what would be critical to prove that they deserve permanent stay of prosecution would be to show that they have been severely prejudiced and that they cannot get a fair trial. So this is a part of that attempt. But I quite liked how the judges themselves reminded Thales' legal counsel that in fact Sean Abrahams had arrived at the decision by applying himself to the cases and the facts in front of him, and was within his rights to actually make that call, even without the representations which Thales seems to be claiming that they needed to have made, along with the president, when the case was being reconsidered.
Ongama Mtimka coming to us live from our studios in Port Elizabeth. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Of course, talking to us about the proceedings in court today in the Pietermaritzburg High Court in Tallis, and the former President Jacob Zuma's bid to have a permanent stay of prosecution. Let's continue now. We stay on Tallis, the company facing bribery and corruption charges alongside the former President Jacob Zuma, as we said, in that particular court, is the subject of a book entitled Incorruptible, authored by Dutch investigative journalist Evelyn Grunink. The story focuses on the genesis of the relationship between French arms companies and the leadership of the ANC in exile. According to Grunink, this relationship began in 1988 in Paris. Our economics editor Tandeka Qobule and reporter Nothando Mokutulela interviewed her.
Former liberation fighter Dulcie September was murdered on the 29th March 1988. It's believed that she was murdered because exceedingly dangerous information of the international arms trade has come to light.
Dulcie September is that she was investigating arms interests, that she discovered something that people high up in France in the defense establishment were really very unhappy about, and that she was murdered to shut her up. I'm pretty confident about that, but I'm not saying that Thales did that, because Thales is only one of 4 companies, or 5 even, involved in France's nuclear missiles.
Former South African President Jacob Zuma and Tallis are at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. They have been sitting before a full bench since Monday.
Actually, what Jacob Zuma is alleged to have gotten amounts to peanuts in the arms industry.
In the dying days of the apartheid state, a plan was hatched to make peace and conclude a massive arms deal, Grunink claims.
So why would a country then decide to spend such an enormous amount on weapons that you don't even need? That is basically, especially when you get to a country that is still fragile, like South Africa was in those, maybe we're still fragile even now,